Growing up as the eldest child in a family of 3 siblings, I always felt like the shadow cast by my brother's blinding golden boy aura. My parents, traditional to their core, saw me not as a person, but as a reflection of their own expectations I could never meet. While my older brother basked in their praise, I was left drowning in their disapproval. They didn't just compare us, they paraded our differences like some twisted spectacle for everyone to see. At family gatherings, neighbors would hear about how my brother had sold another luxury car at his dealership or coached his son's football team to victory, while I was dismissed with a wave of the hand. "Oh, he still works at that comic book shop, doesn't he?" The humiliation burned deep, especially when it happened right in front of friends and acquaintances. One particularly scarring moment stands out at dinner where I tried to explain my career in IT, hoping to finally earn a shred of respect. I spoke passionately about cybersecurity, startups, and the innovations driving modern technology. But before I could finish, my brother cut me off with a sneer, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Do you even know anything real about tech? You're nothing more than a washed-up comic book salesman playing pretend." His words hit like daggers, sharp and deliberate, leaving me frozen in silence. My parents said nothing, their faces masks of indifference, as if his cruelty were justified. That night, I walked away feeling invisible, erased by their disdain. It wasn't just mockery, it was erasure. Every attempt to prove myself felt futile, every word I spoke swallowed by the void of their disregard. Little did they know, this dismissal would one day explode into a reckoning none of us were prepared for. Despite my family's dismissive attitude toward my work at the comic book store, it was there that I discovered my true passion for technology. The shop wasn't just a place to sell comics and video games. It was a hub for like-minded individuals who shared my enthusiasm for innovation. One day, while troubleshooting an issue with our point-of-sale system, I stumbled upon a problem that no one else seemed equipped to solve. Using what little knowledge I had about computers, I fixed the glitch and realized I had a knack for understanding complex systems. This small victory sparked something in me. If I could fix this, what else could I do? It didn't take long before I started offering IT support to other local businesses, helping them set up networks, secure their data, and streamline operations. My business partner, fellow geek, and regular customer at the store saw potential in my skills and suggested we turn this side hustle into something bigger. Together, we co-founded an IT support company out of sheer ambition and determination. At first, it felt surreal, going from shelving graphic novels to building firewalls and managing cybersecurity protocols. Every challenge pushed me further into uncharted territory. When we eventually sold the company to a larger corporation, I walked away not only with financial stability, but also with invaluable experience. That sale became the launchpad for my next venture, joining a cutting-edge private startup as its CTO. What began as a simple job at a humble comic book store had transformed into a journey of self-discovery and professional growth, one that my family still refuses to acknowledge. While they clung to outdated perceptions of me as a comic book guy, I quietly built a life rooted in innovation and success. Yet, instead of celebrating these achievements, I chose to keep them hidden, fearing their judgment would tarnish the joy I found in proving myself not to them, but to myself. Despite the outward appearance of failure that my family clung to, I had quietly built a life many would envy. As the CTO of an innovative tech startup, I was at the forefront of groundbreaking advancements in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Far cry from the comic book store they still believed I worked at. The irony stung every time my mother casually asked when I'd finally get a real job, or when my father dismissed my career as some childish phase I couldn't grow out of. They didn't know or refused to acknowledge that I had co-founded a successful IT support business years ago, which we eventually sold to a major corporation. That sale not only set me up financially, but also opened doors for lucrative side projects and investments. Today, my net worth exceeds 7 figures, yet I live modestly, driving a 15-year-old Saturn and furnishing my 2-bedroom house with second-hand items. My parents' ignorance wasn't just frustrating. It felt like a deliberate refusal to see me for who I truly was. When pressed about my finances during one particularly grueling Sunday dinner, I found myself doubling down on the lie I'd been telling for years. I'm still struggling to make ends meet, I muttered, avoiding eye contact as my brother smirked across the table. His smug expression said it all. He saw this admission as further proof of my inadequacy. What he didn't realize was that my decision to downplay my success stemmed from self-preservation. Every attempt to share glimpses of my achievements had been met with skepticism or outright mockery. Once, when I tried explaining how blockchain technology could revolutionize industries, my brother interrupted, scoffing, "You don't even understand what you're talking about. Stick to selling comics, loser." It wasn't just his words, it was the way my parents nodded along, their silence amplifying the sting. So, I learned to keep quiet, letting them believe whatever narrative suited them best. But living this double life came at a cost. Each snide comment from my brother still chasing pipe dreams, and each pitying glance from my mother carved deeper wounds into my psyche. Their dismissiveness gnawed at me, especially because I knew the truth. I had achieved more than anyone in my family could comprehend. Yet instead of admiration, my fabricated struggles earned me condescension. My sister, ever eager to mimic our parents' behavior, chimed in with her own judgments, implying that my inability to settle down and start a family was somehow tied to my supposed financial instability. Even worse, my parents began treating me like a charity case, insisting I attend weekly dinners where I endured endless lectures about responsibility and adulthood. These meals became a battleground where I fought invisible wars, defending myself against accusations I never voiced aloud. The tension reached new heights when my brother hired a private investigator to dig into my life, convinced he'd uncover evidence of my failure. He thought he was exposing me, but what he uncovered shattered his carefully constructed image of superiority. For years, I had lived under their shadow, enduring ridicule and neglect while silently building a future they couldn't fathom. Now, the truth loomed closer than any of us anticipated. I braced myself for the reckoning that would follow. For years, I had lived under the weight of my family's dismissive expectations, quietly building a life they refused to see. But what I didn't realize was that my brother, fueled by his own insecurities and need for control, had taken matters into his own hands. Unbeknownst to me, he hired a private investigator to dig into my life, convinced he would uncover evidence of my failure, proof that I was as worthless as they all believed. The irony of it stung even before I knew the full extent of his betrayal. He thought he was exposing me, but instead, he set off a chain reaction that would unravel everything. The first sign came late one night when my phone buzzed with an alert from my personal security system, a notification about unauthorized attempts to access my credit report. At first, I dismissed it as a random hack. These things happened occasionally, given my line of work in cybersecurity. But then, another alert popped up, this time detailing repeated queries into my financial history. My stomach churned as I traced the source back to a local pie firm. It wasn't until I cross-referenced the timestamps with recent family interactions that the horrifying truth hit me. My brother was behind it. The same man who mocked me at dinner parties, who treated me like a charity case, had orchestrated this invasion of my privacy. The realization left me reeling, a toxic mix of anger and betrayal bubbling beneath the surface. When the investigator's report finally landed in my inbox, a damning dossier meant for my brother's eyes, only I felt like I was reading someone else's life story. There it was, laid out in cold clinical detail. My net worth exceeding 7 figures, stock options from the sale of my IT company. Profitable side projects, real estate investments saw stark contradictions to the failure narrative my family clung to. Each line of the report read like a slap in the face, not just to them, but to me too. How could they have been so blind? Or worse, how could they have chosen to ignore the signs? But the most gut-wrenching part wasn't the numbers or the assets was the sheer audacity of it all. My brother hadn't just doubted me. He had weaponized his doubt, turning it into a calculated attack on my character. And yet, here I was, holding undeniable proof of my success, while he remained oblivious to the storm brewing. Little did he know, the very investigation he commissioned would expose far more than my supposed shortcomings. It would rip apart the fragile facade of our family dynamics and force us all to confront truths we weren't ready to face. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I realized this wasn't just about money or status anymore. This was about power, perception, and the lengths people will go to maintain their illusions. What started as a quiet rebellion against my family's judgment had become something far greater, reckoning neither of us could escape. After discovering that my brother had hired a private investigator to dig into my life, I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. It wasn't just the invasion of privacy, it was the sheer hypocrisy of his actions. Here he was, prying into my personal affairs while presenting himself as some kind of savior figure for our family. The more I thought about it, the more it consumed me. How dare he sit in judgment when his own life was far from perfect? That's when I decided to turn the tables. I reasoned that if my brother could go behind my back, there was no reason I shouldn't do the same. But unlike him, I wanted answers not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. If he was willing to go this far to expose me, what else might he be capable of? What other secrets was he hiding beneath his polished exterior? The idea gnawed at me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. So, I contacted the same private detective agency, instructing them to investigate him. At first, I told myself it was purely defensive, to protect myself from further manipulation or attacks. But deep down, I knew part of me wanted revenge. For years, I'd endured his condescension, his mockery, and his thinly veiled pity. Now, with proof of my success staring him in the face, I wanted him to feel the same vulnerability he had inflicted on me. I wanted him to know what it felt like to have your carefully constructed image torn apart. The investigation revealed things I hadn't anticipated. The staggering debt, a tase, the IRS troubles, the domestic disputes, and even the DWI charges. Each revelation was like a piece of a puzzle falling into place, painting a picture of a man who was anything but golden. Yet, as satisfying as it was to uncover these truths, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stooping to his level. Still, I justified my decision by telling myself it was necessary. After all, how could I trust someone who clearly didn't trust me? And how could I navigate our already fraught relationship without knowing the full extent of his instability? In the end, hiring the private investigator wasn't just about exposing my brother. It was about reclaiming power in a dynamic where I'd always felt powerless. It was about leveling the playing field, even if it meant stepping into morally ambiguous territory. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let him define me anymore. When the private investigator's report landed in my hands, it wasn't just a revelation of my success, it was an of my brother's carefully concealed chaos. What began as a mission to prove me unworthy had spiraled into something far more damning for him. The golden boy, who prided himself on his polished facade, was drowning in financial quicksand. It turned out that his extravagant lifestyle, the powerboats, TVs and sprawling house was propped up by reckless borrowing. He had taken out mortgages on not one, but 3 different properties, all while juggling mounting debts with the IRS. Each line item in the report painted a picture of desperation masked by arrogance, and I couldn't help but feel both vindicated and horrified. But the bombshell didn't stop at finances. As I scrolled through the document, my stomach churned at what came next. Allegations of domestic disturbances, public intoxication charges, and even Child Protective Services involvement. My brother, the man who strutted around family dinners boasting about his perfect life, had been hiding cracks so deep they threatened to swallow him whole. The most shocking detail: a string of DWI arrests, each dismissed or buried quietly under legal maneuvering. How could someone so outwardly confident be this reckless behind closed doors? And yet, there it was, black and white, undeniable proof of the rot beneath his shiny exterior. The irony stung like salt on an open wound. Here he was, trying to expose me as a failure, only to have his own misdeeds laid bare for everyone to see. When I confronted him during our next family dinner, the tension crackled like electricity in the air. "You think your big house and fancy cars make you untouchable?" I said, sliding the report across the table toward him. His face went pale, then flushed red with rage. For once, his usual bravado faltered. He tried to deny everything, accusing me of fabricating lies, but the evidence spoke louder than his feeble protests. Even worse, when my parents read the report, their expressions shifted from disbelief to quiet devastation. They had worshipped him, placed him on a pedestal, and now the foundation of that idolization was crumbling before their eyes. What struck me hardest wasn't just the betrayal, it was how deeply entrenched these secrets were. My brother's actions weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a much larger problem, one rooted in ego and entitlement. The same man who mocked me for being unsuccessful was teetering on the edge of ruin, dragging his family down with him. Yet, despite the weight of the truth, no one wanted to confront it, not my parents, not even my sister. Instead, they clung to denial, hoping the storm would pass without forcing them to reckon with the uncomfortable reality staring them in the face. But for me, this revelation wasn't just about exposing hypocrisy. It was about understanding the cost of living a lie. And as I sat there watching my family unravel, I realized the real damage wasn't done by the secrets themselves, was the silence that followed. The family dinner that followed the private investigator's revelations was nothing short of a powder keg waiting to explode. I arrived with a mix of dread and resolve, clutching the damning report in my hands like a weapon. The air was thick with tension as we gathered around the table, each of us carrying unspoken grievances and secrets now laid bare. My brother, oblivious to what I knew, launched into his usual monologue about his latest sales triumphs at the dealership, boasting about commissions and upgrades to his powerboat. But this time, I wasn't going to sit silently and let him overshadow me. When the conversation inevitably turned to my life, my failure, as they saw Itzy interrupted with an icy calmness that silenced the room. "Funny you should mention finances," I said, sliding the report across the table toward him. His face froze mid-smirk, the color draining from his cheeks as he scanned the document detailing his financial ruin. The IRS debts, the multiple mortgages, the DWI arrests, and even the domestic disturbance calls. For once, his golden boy facade cracked, revealing the fragile ego beneath. He tried to deny everything, sputtering excuses and accusing me of fabricating lies. But the evidence was undeniable, and I watched with grim satisfaction as his carefully constructed image crumbled before our parents' eyes. At first, my parents reacted with forced reverence, treating me as though I had suddenly transformed into some kind of prodigal son. Their tone shifted, laced with awkward praise and thinly veiled guilt. It was nauseating how quickly they pivoted from disdain to admiration, their words dripping with insincerity. But the facade didn't last long. As the reality of my success sank in, their focus turned accusatory. "You've done so well for yourself," my mother began, her voice sugary but laced with venom. "Why haven't you helped your family more?" My father chimed in, shaking his head in disappointment. "We could have used your support. Instead, you kept all this to yourself." Their hypocrisy hit like a freight train. After years of dismissing me, belittling my career, and mocking my supposed failures, they now demanded gratitude-on money from me. They acted as though my wealth obligated me to bail them out of their struggles, ignoring the fact that I had built my success despite their neglect. When I reminded them of their past treatment, pointing out the years of condescension and dismissal, they doubled down, claiming I was being selfish and ungrateful. My sister sat quietly, occasionally chiming in with passive-aggressive remarks, clearly torn between siding with them and staying neutral. As the argument escalated, old wounds reopened and decades of resentment boiled over. Every insult, every overlooked achievement, every moment of favoritism came rushing back. My brother, desperate to regain control, lashed out, accusing me of ruining the family dynamic. But by then, the damage was done. What started as a revelation had devolved into chaos, leaving us all raw and exposed. And yet, amidst the shouting and accusations, one thing became painfully clear. No amount of money or success could mend the fractures in our family. The weight of years of injustice crashed down on me during that fateful family dinner, forcing me to confront the truth I had buried for so long. My family didn't just misunderstand me, they actively dismissed and devalued me. As the argument spiraled out of control, with accusations flying across the table like daggers, it became painfully clear how deep their biases ran. My brother, cornered and humiliated by the revelation of his financial ruin, lashed out in a way that left the room frozen in stunned silence. "You don't deserve to exist," he screamed, his voice shaking with rage. The words hit me like a sledgehammer, reverberating through the air as if time itself had stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was the sharp intake of breath from my parents, their faces pale with shock but devoid of any real defense against his cruelty. It wasn't just what he said, was the raw, unfiltered hatred behind it. A culmination of years of resentment and jealousy masked as superiority. In that instant, every memory of being overlooked, mocked, and belittled came rushing back. I saw myself as a child, sitting alone at school while other kids played sports I couldn't join because of my asthma. I remembered the countless dinners where my achievements were ignored or twisted into failures, while my brother's every accomplishment was celebrated without question. And now, here we were, decades later, still trapped in the same toxic cycle. But something inside me shifted that night. Instead of shrinking under his words, I felt a surge of clarity resolve to break free from the chains of their judgment. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor with an ear-splitting screech. Without another word, I walked out, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. The drive home was a blur of emotions, each mile stretching longer than the last. It felt like escaping a battlefield, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but beneath it lay a profound sorrow. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment of neglect from my childhood seemed etched into the darkness outside my car window. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the quiet of the night enveloped me, offering a fragile sense of peace. But the pain lingered, sharp and unrelenting. I realized then that setting boundaries wasn't just about protecting myself, was about reclaiming my identity. For too long, I had allowed their opinions to define me, letting their indifference carve wounds into my self-worth. Now, standing in the solitude of my home, I made a silent vow. No more. No more pretending to be someone I wasn't to earn their approval. No more tolerating their abuse disguised as guidance. This was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I chose myself over their expectations. Yet, even as I resolved to move forward, the echoes of my brother's words haunted me. They weren't just his anger talking. They were the culmination of a lifetime of rejection. And though I knew I deserved better, the scars of my past would take time to heal. Meeting Ava felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life, one I hadn't dared to dream about after years of navigating the chaos of my family. She entered my world almost serendipitously. During a technology conference where her keynote speech on cybersecurity left me spellbound. It wasn't just her intelligence that captivated me. It was her grounded demeanor and the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. Over late-night pizza sessions, we bonded over shared experiences her own complicated relationship with her family mirrored, mine in ways that made us both laugh and cringe simultaneously. Together, we began crafting strategies for how I could maintain contact with my family without letting their toxicity consume me. Ava's communication skills were unparalleled, and under her guidance, I started learning how to set boundaries that felt less like walls and more like bridges. Our first attempt at introducing Ava to my family came sooner than expected, driven by a mix of optimism and naivety on my part. I thought having her by my side would soften the blow of our strained dynamics. But instead, it turned into an unmitigated disaster. The tension crackled from the moment we walked through the door. My parents greeted Ava with exaggerated politeness, their smiles so forced they bordered on grotesque. They peppered her with superficial questions. What do you do? Where did you grow up? But their tone carried an undertone of judgment, as if sizing her up as yet another fleeting distraction in my life. My brother took a different approach, launching into a monologue about his dealership achievements while subtly undermining Ava's professional credentials. Cybersecurity. Isn't that just IT support with fancier jargon? He quipped, smirking as though delivering the punchline to some private joke. His condescension hung heavy in the air, and I clenched my fists beneath the table, biting back a retort. Meanwhile, my sister remained icy, barely acknowledging Ava beyond a curt nod. Her silence spoke volumes, amplifying the awkwardness until it became suffocating. Even the kids, usually boisterous and rambunctious, seemed unusually subdued, sensing the palpable discomfort rippling through the room. As the evening dragged on, every interaction felt like walking across a minefield. When Ava tried steering the conversation toward lighter topics, my father abruptly shifted gears, complaining about taxes and retirement plans, a transparent attempt to steer attention away from her. At one point, my mother leaned over and whispered something to my sister, their eyes darting toward Ava before quickly looking away. The subtext was clear: she doesn't belong here. By the time dessert arrived, I could feel Ava's shoulders stiffen beside me, our calm facade beginning to falter under the weight of their thinly veiled hostility. That night, driving home in tense silence, I couldn't help but feel defeated. What had started as a hopeful experiment ended in humiliation, not just for me, but for Ava, who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. Yet, even amidst the wreckage of that disastrous dinner, Ava offered words of reassurance. "We'll figure this out," she said softly, squeezing my hand. And though doubt lingered in my mind, her unwavering support gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to navigate this labyrinth of fractured relationships without losing myself or, here in the process, rebuilding my relationship with my family became less about reconciliation and more about survival, a delicate balancing act between maintaining ties and safeguarding my mental health. With Ava by my side, I began implementing a new strategy: short, controlled interactions that allowed me to stay connected without drowning in their toxicity. These weren't the drawn-out Sunday dinners of the past, but brief coffee dates or casual afternoon visits, carefully orchestrated to minimize conflict. At first, these encounters felt like walking through a minefield. My parents, still grappling with the revelation of my success, oscillated between forced admiration and thinly veiled resentment. Their newfound respect for my financial achievements quickly morphed into thinly disguised pleas for support. "You've done so well for yourself," my mother would say, her tone sweet yet laced with expectation. "It wouldn't hurt to help your brother get back on his feet, would it?" Each suggestion was a dagger wrapped in silk, reminding me how little they truly valued me as a person. My brother, meanwhile, doubled down on his attempts to undermine me. No matter how cordial I tried to be, he found ways to twist our conversations into verbal sparring matches. During one particularly tense visit, he leaned back in his chair, smirking as he said, "Must be nice to have all that money and still live like a college dropout." His words dripped with venom, designed not just to insult, but to provoke. Yet this time, I didn't shrink under his barbs. Instead, I met his gaze steadily, choosing silence over retaliation, a tactic Ava had helped me master. It infuriated him, leaving him flustered and searching for another angle of attack. Ava's presence was both a shield and a lifeline. Her calm demeanor diffused tensions before they could escalate, and her ability to steer conversations toward neutral topics often saved us from disaster. But even with her support, every meeting left me emotionally drained. The weight of years of neglect and judgment lingered beneath the surface, threatening to resurface at any moment. One day, after a particularly grueling encounter, I found myself replaying my mother's words in my head. "Why don't you buy a bigger house? You can afford it." What she really meant was, "Why won't you share what you have with us?" The implication stung, a reminder that no matter how much I achieved, I would always be seen as an extension of their needs rather than a person in my own right. Despite the challenges, I began to notice subtle shifts. My sister, once quick to mimic our parents' dismissive attitudes, started softening toward me. Her middle child, who reminded me so much of myself, adored Ava and seemed eager to bridge the gap between us. Even my father, usually stoic and distant, occasionally let slip moments of genuine curiosity about my work, though he never fully abandoned his condescending tone. These small victories gave me hope, but they were hard-won and fleeting. Every step forward came with the risk of being pulled back into old patterns. Still, I clung to the belief that change was possible, not because I owed them anything, but because I owed it to myself to try. As the dust began to settle from the chaos of my family's unraveling, I found myself daring to dream of a future that once felt impossible. With Ava by my side, we started envisioning a life built on mutual respect and genuine love, qualities I had never experienced in my own upbringing. We talked about what our family could look like, a home filled with laughter, understanding, and unwavering support. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine being not just a partner, but also a parent, breaking the cycle of neglect and judgment that had haunted me for so long. It was a fragile hope, one tempered by the scars of my past, but it gave me strength, a beacon guiding me through the lingering shadows. Yet, even as I embraced this newfound optimism, the ghosts of my childhood continued to linger. One evening, as Ava and I sat together planning our next steps, the phone rang. On the other end were my parents, their voices trembling with desperation. They begged for financial help, painting a dire picture of mounting bills and unforeseen expenses. My chest tightened as I listened, torn between compassion and self-preservation. Part of me wanted to help, to finally be seen as someone capable of making a difference. But another part recoiled at the thought of enabling their toxic patterns. How could I trust them after everything they'd done? After years of dismissing me, now they sought me out only when it benefited them. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, heavier than any burden I'd faced before. Ava, ever the voice of reason, reminded me of the boundaries we'd worked so hard to establish. "You can't fix them," she said gently, her hand resting on mine. "But you can protect yourself." Her words struck a chord, yet the choice remained excruciating. Helping them felt like opening Pandora's box, risking old wounds reopening under the guise of charity. Refusing, however, left me grappling with guilt and questions of whether I was repeating their mistakes. In that moment, I realized the road ahead would always be fraught with challenges, but perhaps navigating them with Ava made all the difference.